Welcome back, everybody. Last time we were covering some of the basics to get us ready for the heat treat. Now let's talk about the heat treat. Now it is 3 separate parts: normalizing, quenching, and tempering. So first of all, let's handle the normalizing of the steel. Now what that involves is heating up your steel so that you can normalize the grain structure. So when you bring the blade up to forging temperature, you're helping to bring all of those stress points that may have developed throughout the steel and to relieve them consistently. And that grain structure from the tang all the way to the tip of the blade is all going to be evened out so that when you go for the quench, there's less likelihood for warps and cracks. Another important point is you'll see that I am putting it in tang first, and that's because the tip of the blade is so thin it will overheat. So here you see that now that the tang is sufficiently warm, what I can do is I can flip it around, and now that the back half of the blade is already up to temperature, I can now work moving the steel in and out of the forge to get a nice even heat instead of creating hot spots and cool spots. The more you keep it moving, the better it is for the steel. Also considering turning your heat down a little bit so that you don't heat it up too quickly, and you have more control to get your blade evenly heated all the way through. Here you can barely see a cool spot towards the spine. So now that we've brought it up to temperature, let's put it in a vise to cool down. Make sure to let it cool to touch and do this normalizing cycle 3 times. Here it is in time lapse. Honestly, because I think it looks cool. Now here I'm taking some scrap metal and I'm preheating the oil to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason you do that is because if there's too drastic of a contrast between the material and the oil, you'll create a vapor barrier. Now here, as I'm quenching it, I pulled it out of the oil a little early to show you what can happen if your steel isn't cooled off enough. You'll get a fireball. Looks great on TV, but it's not great for good hardening. To harden it properly, dunk it in at around 1475 Fahrenheit for 1095 and leave it in there for around 10 seconds, agitating it up and down to help even out the cooling process. Otherwise, you'll get hot spots in the oil and it will prevent it from cooling evenly. Now, as it's cooling off, you'll still have a little bit of time after you pull it out of the oil to make sure it's straight. So keep a vise nearby and look down the length of the blade to make any needed adjustments while it's still somewhat malleable. But be careful you don't break it. Now let's do a file test to see if it hardened. Hear how the file is skating right off and not digging in very much? That's good. Now if we turn it around and do it on the tang, there we let it stay a little cool to absorb a little bit of impact, which means it digs right in. We have a hardened blade. Now we gotta temper this bad boy. For 1095 at this thickness, I do 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll leave it in there for about an hour, then I'll let it cool, and I'll do it for another hour or so. All right, now what you have is a hardened, tempered blade. It's a little bit dirty, as you can see, but what you want is that straw color. In fact, this is a little bit too light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it back in probably for 425 degrees for about an hour. But what you want is a light straw color so that you know that the blade is tempered, and let it soak like that for about an hour once you've reached it. So it's important to make sure that's done. Otherwise, if you don't temper the blade, you will have a very brittle blade that is very prone to snapping. So it will not be considered a functional blade until you do so. Now, a few points I want to bring out as well is that there are some parts where you should examine your product and then you should make adjustments. Like my plunge lines are very dirty here. Admittedly, just because I kind of rushed it. But you see how it's just not clean looking on either side. You want that to be nice and clean. Now what other improvements can I make? My jimping is a little bit uneven. See that? That one's larger. Is that a big deal? No, it's not a big deal at all. But you want to be able to look at your material and what you're making and improve it. Now she's ready for a handle and she's ready to be sharpened. Now what I could do for the handle is just a simple paracord. So you could easily do that, just wrap paracord around it. There's plenty of videos on how to do that. And to sharpen it, because it's just got a flat edge there right now, you can use the belt sander as well, which would be a very great way in order to get it nice and sharp. But we're going to save sharpening for a whole separate class because there's so many ways to do so. I want to make sure I have plenty of time in order to cover it. So for now, this is where we are, and this is what we've got. What do you think? It's not too bad. And don't worry, if the line isn't clean, if it's a little wavy, you can still work on that, because even after I'm done tempering it, I'm going to grind it and clean it up. But we also have a class all on finishes. So there's a basic knife. It'll get the work done. And yeah, that's what we got so far. Let's go for some more lessons.